would you describe Afrofuturism?
Given everything else that we've gone through, I've always thought Afrofuturism represents the ideal place that Black folks would like to inhabit.
In the future.
In the future, for sure.
Mark Deary, a professor of African American Studies, he defines Afrofuturism as speculative fiction that treats African American themes and addresses African American concerns in the context of 20th century techno culture. And another professor, assistant professor of politics and gender, Yolanda Buka, she describes Afrofuturism more to be an artistic movement, combining the elements of science fiction, magical realism, and African history. And she really highlights Black Panther as one of the most groundbreaking releases in recent memory that really is based in Afrofuturism. I love Black Panther.
Yeah, I was not sure what I was going to see, but after watching that film, it is clear to me that it had perhaps an answer that speaks to the continuing economic problems that African nations have. Because the picture was talking about this fictitious African nation that is number one in the world because of its vibranium discovery. Vibranium was the most important mineral, the most effective mineral, and it allowed them to do all kinds of things. More importantly, it allowed them a lot of independence to do what they wanted to do around the world. In that sense, the connection is, as you know, and this is not fiction, it's a fact, that the continent of Africa is home to some of the most important and strategic minerals that all the nations need to develop. And the question is, we can do a Wakanda for most African nations even as we speak. Yeah. So Wakanda, for some of us, wasn't just a fictitious into the future idea. It could really have answers to transform the lives of African peoples.
Or it's kind of, like you said before, reimagining if those minerals that exist on the continent weren't depleted by colonial powers.
Well, they haven't been depleted all these years, and they're still there, looking and taking them out.
Right. And that's really why she says Black Panther is one of the most groundbreaking portrayals of Afrofuturism, because it really talks about the history and the future in a very specific Black way.
Yeah. And the possibilities of what we can do to enhance the community.
Afrofuturist themes don't just exist in literature and cinema, it's also prevalent in music, and you know how much I love music.
I do.
So, have you ever listened to Sun Ra and the orchestra?
Yes, I have. I remember those days.
How would you describe his music?
Surreal. Different.
I think he's one of the earliest, probably the earliest example we have in Black music of Afrofuturism, specifically because he not only was a pioneer in kind of what we call fusion of genres. There's genres have always existed, but I think he's someone who wanted to fuse jazz with electronics in a way that sounded really surreal, but also to take it further, he wanted a lot of his band to wear out of this world costumes that incorporated parts of Egyptian culture, but also incorporated parts of technology and alien invasion and just outer space kind of props and costumes. And that's how he kind of led his Afrofuturist movement in the early 50s. And I think he was the earliest form of Afrofuturism music that we see, because he gave way to another huge group in Black history, Parliament-Funkadelic, to have kind of a space to create their own idea of how they see, of how they're choosing to fuse different types of Black genres with this surrealist themes, mentalities, and just this kind of psychedelic almost genre. You know, they really created, Black Parliament created P-Funk. They created really what the genesis of funk is, but they took it further. Specifically, George Clinton, he was kind of being like the front man of Parliament-Funkadelic. He wanted to kind of take the funk idea and bring it to outer space. So he created these things called Afronauts, which is an astronaut, but Afro. They're African American, they're Black. And he had this idea that, when they perform on stage, they want the mothership or a spaceship to kind of be on stage with them. Since the album that they released that kind of birthed this is called Mothership Connection. So yes, George Clinton wanted to create these Afronauts to travel through space and time, funkatizing galaxies, as he said. So these forefathers from the 50s to the 70s birthed what I think is modern day Afrofuturism in music. You like P-Funk? You like Parliament-Funkadelic?
For sure, I remember them very well. I thought it was strange. I was younger, so I don't think I was as wise as I am now. Now I see it very much so. Clearly what it is that they were trying to do. They were way ahead of everybody else.
Right. And I think that kind of older iteration of Afrofuturism really hones in on African history and Black history from the early 1900s into the late 1900s. However, as we move into, the turn of the century, 90s into the 2000s, we kind of see a pivot in Afrofuturism in music. It's not exactly, Egyptian wear and psychedelic sounds and visuals.
And
funkatizing galaxies and Afronauts. It's more so looking at, what the influence of Y2K has on Black culture. Looking at in the 90s and the 2000s, things are very chrome, cool toned. People are talking about flying cars and robots, and even going back to when we were talking about Parliament-Funkadelic and Sun Ra, Star Wars, Star Trek, all of those old movies, they're kind of the basis of what Sun Ra and George Clinton were pulling from. However, those movies at the time didn't really imagine Black people in those movies. They didn't have a lot of representation. So I think a lot of artists such as Missy Elliott, Aaliyah, and some girl groups like 702 and Black, they took all of those influences and brought it into the Y2K. Like I said, Missy Elliott is kind of the biggest influential Afrofuturist musician, I think, in Black music since the forefathers, because she worked with big movie directors and big music video directors such as Hype Williams to create, not only just make the sound as surreal as the worlds that people are imagining, but Hype Williams was able to bring a very huge cinematic feature to regular music videos. And Missy Elliott's Super Duper Fly is pretty much the biggest hip hop music video, I think, known to man. Have you ever seen it?
No, I have not.
It's the one where she's in the big trash bag. Well, I'll show you. But there's that one, and there's also Sock It To Me. Those are the biggest Missy Elliott videos that we've known, and she's in like these Mega Man costumes. She's going out of space and she's fighting space with Lil Kim is in the video and Yo-Yo's in the video. So it's a really interesting way that she's blending hip hop culture, African culture, Black, like the Black R&B dance break, as well as bringing in Hype Williams' imagination of sci-fi, techno, Martian galaxy. So, talking about Missy Elliott's impact, specifically one of my favorite hip hop writers, Nadira Simmons, she states in her book, First Things First, that I'm reading right now, she said, with her music, production, lyrics, and outfits, Missy Elliott used Afrofuturism to take herself and us to another century and beyond. And we can really feel that with artists today like Janelle Monáe. You've heard of Janelle Monáe?
Yes, I have.
Yes, Janelle Monáe is another more recent music artist, not just music artist, but actress and just all around interesting woman. She has based a lot of her albums and her music in Afrofuturist themes. Like from her first album is called the Archandroid, or the Metropolis, I should say. And then it births this idea of the Archandroid, where she's really telling a story through the discography that she has. It starts with this idea of the metropolis, where she's building this kind of utopia dystopia, where she as a Black woman imagines herself to be what's called an android. But in this future, androids and humans still exist. Androids are kind of seen as subhuman, othered in a lot of ways that she as a Black woman has experienced in her life too. And she kind of creates these worlds and these albums until it kind of comes to a head in one of my favorite Janelle Monáe albums, Dirty Computer, in 2018. And that was kind of not only a really influential album, but she created a movie as well. There's kind of this combination, this marriage of music and cinema that a lot of these artists from Missy Elliott decide to blend to really take their vision to the next level. So you don't just hear what you described as Sun Ra being strange or surreal, but they really kind of put you in this space to see the robots, the gizmos, the gadgets, and the kind of flying cars and the world that they're creating with their music. There's so many ways that artists have iterated, changed, altered what we think and what we imagine Black people to like in the future. And some of them take the history literally to see a future where Black people didn't experience slavery, didn't experience, where Africa didn't experience colonialism. But there's also people like Janelle Monáe who take history and not just reimagine a utopia, you know, in a Martian galaxy for Black people. She takes what pain and what trauma Black people have gone through and retells a story through a different lens and finds different ways to connect people to her story and Black people's story in the US. I really love how a lot of these artists talk about Afrofuturist themes, so it's really interesting. So thank you to Sun Ra, I guess, for kind of allowing people like Janelle Monáe and one of my favorite newer artists, Tenario, to kind of evolve. So speaking of Afrofuturism in literature, have you ever read Octavia Butler's work?
No, I haven't, but I'm very familiar with the influence that she's had.
Have you heard of Parable of the Sower?
Yes.
Of course. Parable of the Sower is her biggest work, I believe, that she's ever written. A lot of people revere her as one of the greatest sci-fi writers, not just Black and female, but period, greatest sci-fi writers. For me, I think Parable of the Sower is a beautiful testament to not only what it's like to reimagine and insert weird, surrealist, alien, dystopian type of themes into the writing, but she really speaks to using the history. You know, you talk about Sankofa as to go back and retrieve, to go back and learn, to go back and take things that you've lost or that you've missed or that have become, you know, that have disappeared or erased. She really takes that idea and she uses it to almost like tell the future. Parable of the Sower is a very prolific piece of work that I think, even though it's written in 1993, if you look at it in 2024, you're kind of shocked at how close to life that she's talking about, how close to life, speaking of the political landscape, the social landscape, the religious landscape. She really talks and speaks to a lot of different facets of Black culture through the lens of Black history in a way that us in 2024 kind of feels like she's telling the future herself.